Hello everyone, my name is Matt Delbosc and I'm the lead engineer at Ubisoft Australia. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what engineering looks like at Ubisoft. I'm going to talk about some of the tools and technologies that we use in our day-to-day. I'm going to talk about what the life of an engineer looks like and some of the skill sets that we look for when we recruit people. And finally, I'll cover a little bit of some of the challenges that we encounter, both from the perspective of a new starter joining our team, but also from our perspective as an employer. Now, a little bit about me. I started my career in traditional IT with a Bachelor of Computer Science from Monash, but I very quickly went into games development through a diploma at the AIE in Melbourne. So I spent many years working for Transmission Games in Melbourne, working on air combat games and a cricket game. And I was also lucky enough to work briefly on Dead Space 2 with EA Visceral. But for the last 10 years, I've been based in Toronto in Canada. So I moved overseas, joined Ubisoft, and got to work on many of the key titles over there. So starting from Splinter Cell Blacklist, to working on the Far Cry brand, on Rainbow Six, and most recently on the Watch Dogs franchise, starting with Watch Dogs 2 and Watch Dogs Legion. And recently I've moved back to Australia and now working with a team partnering on X-Defiant with the Ubisoft San Francisco team. And really today I'm going to talk about my experience at Ubisoft as a whole over the last 10 plus years that I've worked with the company. Now, talking about our tech at a high level, what's interesting about Ubisoft is that a lot of our technology is built in-house. So we tend not to use external or third-party engines. We have two main engines that we use. One is called Snowdrop. That's the engine that's been used to build games like The Division, Starlink Battle for Atlas, and more recently it's being used for the upcoming Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. The other engine at Ubisoft that is mainly in use is called Anvil, and that's the engine which is used for the entire Assassin's Creed series, for example, but also games like Rainbow Six Siege. And most importantly about those engines, they are all entirely built in C++. So most of our programmers will spend most of their time programming in C++. Now, those engines are designed to support a lot of people making quite large games, and we do a lot of work to allow sharing of technology between games and engines. So, for example, a single engine at any point in time could be supporting multiple games in development, and there'll be a kind of product group supporting the core of the engine, but the games will take that, potentially make some of their own modifications, and sometimes contribute it back to the main engine. We also have a central technology group which builds technology and kind of central middleware or APIs that are used by every single game and every single engine in production at Ubisoft. And finally, games may even contribute and share technology with each other. So you can see we have a very large ecosystem of technology and technology sharing. And we even have our own internal developers conference. So the Ubisoft Developers Conference, it's held every year in Montreal, and we have teams from all around the world that get together and share the technology or the ideas or the things that they get to work on, which is pretty cool. The other thing that I really like about Ubisoft is the investment that the company spends on R&D. We have a department called Ubisoft LaForge, whose main goal is to connect cutting-edge academic research with development in video games. So they work with researchers doing cutting-edge stuff and try to bring that research into practical applications in some of the games we make. And just to show a video and show a little bit of animation in this presentation, this is a paper that was recently posted on our website, and it's all about taking in animation data and using machine learning to apply that to a physically simulated ragdoll. And then we get this really impressive and realistic effects where characters moving around react to physics and to their environment very realistically. And I find this stuff fascinating, so I really love the research coming out of LaForge. Moving on a little bit, a lot of the tools that we use come from Microsoft. So we'll use Outlook and Teams for communication, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all that kind of stuff. For programmers, Visual Studio is the IDE that we use for all of our development. And we use Perforce for source control and Swarm, which is Perforce's software for code reviews, which is something that's very important for what we do as programmers. Moving on, we use Jira for all of our task tracking and kind of project management. It's the main tool we use for that. And for any console development that we do, we'll use the proprietary tools that are provided by Sony and by Microsoft for their various consoles. Now, if you're a programmer at Ubisoft, here's an example of what your day might look like. First of all, you might start your morning with a stand-up with your team, talk about what you're going to be working on today, what are your blockers, what are your goals, that kind of stuff. Up next, you may do a call with one of your co-dev partners. So one of the interesting things about development on projects at Ubisoft is we often have teams from multiple studios and locations in the world working together. So we do work a lot with people in different countries, and that means having calls with them to sync up on anything that we're working on together. Up next, you might get into the meat of your programming day. So you might sync the code from Perforce, rebuild the game, get yourself set up, then launch the game, test whatever you're working on, and of course write some code, fix a bug, implement a feature, whatever it may be on the day. You'll then go into the game and debug again, make sure it all works correctly. And really, rinse and repeat. You'll probably be spending most of your day as an engineer kind of in that loop of writing some code, testing, debugging, so on and so forth. And maybe at the end of the day, we might do a team playtest. We might all play the game together, check it out, see how our features are going. We may review specific features that someone worked on today and give feedback and kind of discuss the next steps. Then there's, of course, other stuff like lunch or one-on-ones with your manager, and also social things. Even when we're working from home, we do have social calls, give an opportunity for people to relax together, joke around, maybe play some games together. All those sorts of things still happen whether someone is remote or in person in the office. You may also do code reviews, give your co-workers feedback on some of the code that they've written. And finally, you may also do some training. We do have a lot of training material that we make available to our employees, and we do encourage them to take advantage of that and read that material, watch videos, do some interactive stuff, all sorts of opportunities for people to develop themselves, and we really want to help our engineers grow and get better as they work with us. When we interview engineers, I'll give you some examples of things that we look for. So, of course, very important for us is C++ skills. So we'll press people on their knowledge of language features, of data structures and algorithm, of memory management, all the kind of stuff that's the meat of C++ programming. For certain roles, we may also ask for questions related to specialist knowledge. So, for example, for a gameplay engineer, we might ask them a bit more about their knowledge of 3D maths or physics. For an engine programmer, we may get into assembly programming. For an online programmer, we may talk a bit about network replication. We also like to do problem-solving exercises where we might ask someone, give someone a problem and ask them, hey, how would you go about solving this particular problem? Think of some of the complications. How would you solve those complications? Or maybe we'll pick a feature in a game that they've played recently and talk about how this particular feature in that game could have been implemented. The other thing we look for during our interviews is communication skills, because we work with teams that are very distributed, and for us it's very important that our engineers can communicate effectively with the rest of the team. So we look for someone's ability to explain what they were doing in detail, make sure that we understand what they're telling us. We will look for people asking the right kind of questions and making sure they clarify anything that we pose to them. And also making sure that their communication is clear and concise. Other things that we might ask in general, for example, is, do people analyze the game that they play? When you're playing a game, are you thinking about it from a developer perspective and kind of looking at how things could be implemented? We'll also talk about specializations, especially for new starters. It's not something they may have thought about, and we do want people to think about that and where they want to go in their career in the future. So talking a little bit about specialization, we find that most engineers at Ubisoft will end up specializing in a certain area of the field. Our teams are quite large, they're fairly distributed, and so we tend to have different groups of engineers focusing on different aspects of the game being built. So some of the specialties we have include gameplay. Those are the engineers who work on game mechanics, controls, input, game logic, that kind of stuff. We have UI engineers who focus on the game's user interface, HUD, menus, and although many engineers are capable of being good UI engineers, I find that it's very rare to find someone who's truly passionate about UI and UX. And UX is a super interesting and very fascinating field, but not all engineers really think about that or get trained to look for those kinds of things. We also have AI engineers who focus on NPC behaviors, how they interact with the players, and that kind of stuff. And of course, these days, when you hear AI engineer, people tend to think machine learning, so we get a lot of ML engineers applying for character AI positions, and they don't necessarily have the background that we need in implementing character behaviors in video games. And of course, these days, an AI engineer building character behaviors may be using machine learning to do that. So those skill sets are all overlapping, and machine learning is becoming more and more prevalent in game development. Up next, we have tools programmers who will build the tools that our content creators use to make the game. And online programmers. So there's kind of two subcategories of online programmers. There's the online programmers who focus on the back end and kind of making sure our servers are scalable, they can handle millions of players, the database is structured correctly, all that kind of stuff. And we also have online programmers who focus on the client side, so networking, gameplay replication, these kinds of things. Up next, we have engine programmers. Those people might focus on more low-level things, sort of like file I/O or memory management, but also platform support, so making sure that our engine runs well and reliably on all of the consoles and platforms and PC flavors that we need to support. We also have audio programmers who specialize specifically in audio and working with audio directors and audio team to make sure that all of that works correctly and sounds great inside the game. Rendering programmers, of course, focus on the game's visuals. It might be implementing shaders or visual effects or that kind of stuff. And then we start getting some very kind of niche specialties. So for example, animation programmers, that is a role that we do have in many of our teams at Ubisoft. They specialize in the animation engine and working with animators and motion capture to make sure our character motion is really fluid and looks great in the games that we make. And going even more niche, we have physics programmers who work with the physics engine and make sure that the way the game interacts with the physics simulation is realistic or satisfies the needs of the gameplay, and it's a very niche expertise, but it's needed, and it's very maths heavy. So physics programmers need to be on top of the game when it comes to maths. And interestingly, I've sorted all of these roles in order of how easy or hard they are to find. We find we have a lot more applicants for gameplay programmer positions, for example, compared to just about anything else. So I would definitely encourage people thinking about joining engineering at Ubisoft to really think about what areas does interest them, what do they want to specialize in the long term, because that is really going to help people grow in their career in our company. So when someone joins us at Ubisoft, there are a few challenges that they have to get over to become successful. One of the things people might not be used to is that our teams are quite distributed. So as I mentioned, we have people in multiple countries working together on the same game. And so there are people that we work with that we may never meet face to face. It's always going to be video calls or whatever. And so learning to interact with those people, deal with the different time zones is a bit of a challenge, and is something that people have to learn. And of course, in the last few years, even if we're in the same country, a lot of our teams work from home. We have office space, people come into the office, but we tend to leave that flexibility up to the actual team members. So different people may come in on different days, and for a new starter, joining a new company, being at home, can be a challenge, can be a bit isolating. We try and encourage new starters to come into the office and make sure that they have buddies or mentors to help them out, but it's never going to be every day during the entire onboarding period. So there's a little bit of a challenge. On the engineering side, our code bases are quite large. They've built a lot of game. We have a lot of systems there that do a lot of stuff, and so finding your way around that can be tricky. It's definitely a skill set that people have to learn. And of course, it's all proprietary APIs. Because our engines are in-house, you can't Google any information about it. This is all internal knowledge that is within Ubisoft that you have to learn. Other questions people might ask when they join one of our teams is, what's the game about? Now, this is very normal with game development. We iterate on our games constantly. They're always changing. We're always fine-tuning, improving, changing the core gameplay loop to make it better and better. And so if you're joining a team early in development, you may get different answers depending on who you talk to. And the later you are in the development of the game, the more precise it is. But even then, our games are large, are complex, so playing it for an hour, you may not get the perfect sense of exactly what our game is about. People may also ask why things are done a certain way. Often the answer is that there are good answers to why things are done a certain way. There's historical reasons, why it became that way, why we chose to implement this particular feature in this way, where there could have been an alternative. But those answers aren't always obvious or well documented. You sort of have to ask the right people to find out and get the right answers. And sometimes, of course, someone may come in with a fresh perspective and ask us why we're doing it that way, and we say, you know what, we don't know, you're right, there is a better way to do this, thanks, let's do it better. So we want new starters to ask us those questions about, this is strange, why are you making life harder for yourselves? That does help us. So fresh perspectives are great. I love it. Knowing who to contact is a challenge. we have distributed teams with expert knowledge in multiple locations. So finding the right contact, you might have to ask 2 or 3 different people sometimes to get to the right person. And so learning to navigate that tree of contact is an important skill. And finally, finding documentation. Now, we have a lot of documentation. We have wikis and Confluence and SharePoint, and our games have a large volume of Docker that explains how it works. But finding that documentation isn't always straightforward. Our engines are not commercial engines designed to be sold to the public. So there is a bit of tribal knowledge and knowing where to look to really get to where you need to get to. Now, I've said a lot of things that might be a little bit worrying and a bit daunting to people, but really it's not that bad. Like, we spend a lot of effort helping new starters through all of this. We know that this is daunting. We know that there's a lot of information to pass before you really understand what your role is and how to work effectively. And so we don't expect people to deliver features on day 1 or week 1 or maybe week 2 either. We know that there's an onboarding process. We have kind of documented a lot of the onboarding, but we're still trying to improve it all the time, make sure that a new starter kind of finds their feet quickly, but we don't expect that they'll be able to deliver straight away. So we do give a lot of support for new starters to work through all of these problems that I've described here. Now, finally, I wanted to talk about one of the challenges that we do have within Ubisoft. Our engineering teams are not as diverse as we would like them to be, and we want to work towards improving that. Globally, Ubisoft has many programs that are designed to help with this. For example, Develop at Ubisoft is a program designed for people who identify as women to get internship and or mentorship opportunities within Ubisoft. And depending on the studio worldwide, there'll be other similar programs depending on the local circumstances. But really, we want to work with educational facilities to make sure diverse students are coming through, and there are people that coming through that we can help grow and develop into being successful game developers. And finally, that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening, and please shout with all your questions.